All right, so this week, I wanted to talk about what to expect from publishing, which is a thing that Heather had suggested because she was running into issues in some writing groups that she's part of, particularly one for her publisher, where authors had unrealistic expectations and were falling short of those expectations and getting upset. So I think having a conversation about what to expect when you publish is going to be a really useful and positive conversation to have. So, when we're talking about publishing and what to expect, there's a whole lot of different pieces, parts, and it also depends on whether or not you're self publishing or traditionally publishing. I'm going to address both of those some through this. And if you have questions, anybody who hasn't been to one of these before, please throw them in the chat. Feel free to have conversation in there. You don't need to be silent and listen to me. I pull information from the chat and I'm watching it while I talk. So feel free to throw things in if you have advice, suggestions, or what have you. So when you're approaching publishing, one of the things that I see most frequently when dealing with authors with unrealistic expectations, one of the things that really drives me nuts. So there's the aforementioned cat. Let's see if she gets in frame. Come on, shoo, shoo, off my desk. Go, be gone. I know. She's mad. She doesn't like the green screen because it's things. Anyway, one of the things that I've noticed, particularly with traditionally published authors, is the belief that all a writer has to do in order to be successful is pound the keys, send the manuscript off to their publisher, and then walk away. And that obviously isn't the case. Because, angry cat. But that's why. Angry cats is why. Because there are a lot of pieces that are involved in publishing that aren't just writing. Writing in and of itself is an art, and then what you do after that and how you approach the world following that is a separate kind of conversation. So the idea that your publisher is just going to do everything for you and all you have to do is sit in your chair and write books while drinking, I don't know, mimosas is unfortunately inaccurate. Even if you are famous, because even famous authors have to do a lot of marketing and promotion. There's a lot that happens. So that is a thing. I'm not going to turn this into a marketing talk before anybody gets worried. The second expectation that kind of falls flat for folks is how many books you're actually going to sell. So my novel launched the 13th, so 2 days ago, and I have sold about 100 copies so far, most of which has been people pre-release, pre-buying it, and I'm also selling author-signed copies, which I'm waiting on from my distributor. Right, that's a lot of copies. So, but that said, I've been working really, really hard at the marketing and working really hard at making sure everybody knew I had a book coming out. And 100 copies is a lot. But a lot of people have this image in their head that they're going to sell hundreds, plural, of copies or thousands of copies when their book comes out within the first few days. And unless you have a huge following already, that's not a realistic expectation because if you don't have a huge following, nobody knows to buy your book. Thank you. Well, I mean, I wasn't saying it to brag. I was more trying to bring other folks' expectation numbers down. But yes, 100 copies is actually pretty good. I'm very proud of myself, and I'm very pleased with my progress. But again, that was because I did a huge amount of pre-release marketing and was telling everybody about this, and I also got some really good reviews that are helping sell my books. So that is another thing that is helpful. I don't know if you heard that in the background, but that was epic. So so that is a thing that you really need to think about too. Um, don't like you're not going to immediately become famous. I'm still definitely not famous by any stretch of the imagination, as much as I kind of wish I was some days. But at the same time, I'm kind of glad I'm not, because fame comes with its own exhaustive things. Rurik, yes, that is absolutely a thing. I've done a lot of talks about marketing. There are a few on the channel, and I will do more talks about marketing in the future. I took a break from that because I hounded people about it for about 3 months straight, and everyone was like, please, please do something else for a bit. We feel called out. So I took a break. But, and yeah, you definitely lead. One thing you can do, so marketing and expectations. One of the things that people have in their expectations when they're getting ready to publish also is that you don't start marketing until you have the book out, and that is deeply inaccurate. You might want to start marketing after you finish the first draft. And by marketing, I mean letting people know you're a writer. And if you, like Lead does a bunch of wonderful art based on his characters and his stories. If you're like Lead, sharing art based on your books and characters to kind of drum up hype and get people to recognize things, that's a great way to market. Yep, I know, I'm sorry, Anagram, I have betrayed you. But you can start. Right, exactly, Nid. That is bang on. You start marketing the brand and developing your brand as an author. And do that before you even worry about marketing the book. You don't need to draw Rurik, that's okay. That was just an example. My marketing for my book has been mostly through my editing. I give a ton of advice to authors. Case in point, this group we're having right now. This is marketing for me. Because the more folks know I exist, and yeah, posting memes on Twitter is fine, but the more folks know I exist, the better off people are going to know, oh, this person exists, oh, this person wrote a book, and the more likely they are to buy the book. So there are many different ways you can approach that. And some of it could be networking. Again, like attending things like this, being part of other groups, being part of the writing community on Twitter or TikTok or Instagram or wherever you hang out when you're not on Discord. Joining those writing communities is part of this experience, and networking with other writers will really help you a lot, because when you have a book launch, you can share, say they have a newsletter. I had several friends who put out copy or newsletter to their fans about my book when it launched, which helped. Because we were at least a complementary genre, not the same genre, but complementary, enough that we could do some cross-promotion. That kind of thing is really beneficial, and that is something about publishing that most authors, I won't say most, there are many authors who misunderstand that networking with other writers is more than just making friends, though yes, it is making friends, but these are people who understand how to sell your book. So if you get published by a publisher, a lot of them have groups of various different flavors where the authors of that publisher can go. I know Heather's has a Facebook group, for example, where they can go and discuss various different parts of the marketing process, network, and help each other sell their books. My company doesn't have that. It has been suggested to me, but I have had other things on my plate, though it is a plan that is in the background somewhere. Enjoy your walk. So that is absolutely a thing that is part of this networking and developing friends. I mean, yeah, Lead, you can definitely do that. You can say, I don't have a launch date, I don't have a release date, but I can tell you some fun stuff about the story. So this networking and developing friends and getting followers on Twitter or other social media, this kind of thing, is you're talking about personal relationships, which is really going to be a huge driver in your experience and your success in publishing. Also, another thing to recognize, if you are signing with a traditional publisher, if you're signing with a small indie publisher, there's a good chance you aren't going to get an advance, because most small indie published books never earn out the cost that it takes to put one out. And I can say that from very, very serious experience. Most of those books do not earn out their cost. So don't necessarily go into this expecting a big advance in the thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars, even in the hundreds of dollars. Depending on the publisher you go with. If you go with one of the big five and they think they can really sell you, yeah, you'll get an advance. However, you're not going to get anything more for royalties until you've earned out that advance. So that is one thing about advances to know, is that if you are getting an advance, that means that you are not going to get anything more until you have earned out that advance and sold enough copies to warrant them sending you royalties. And so that is absolutely a thing. Another thing about traditional publishing is when you sign with a traditional publisher, you're going to lose a lot of control over your book, but that's not inherently a bad thing for most authors. And I say that because a lot of authors have these ideas for what they should do for cover art or for interior design or what have you that just aren't going to work, that aren't correct for their genre, that aren't going to attract people to their book. And I worked with an author who had this idea of having a taxi driving under the ocean with a jellyfish in the background and a whole bunch of other things when it was a surrealistic novel about a taxi driver in New York City. It had nothing to do with, like, it was a surrealistic book. And when I was looking at the cover art, when I was looking at what they wanted, I was like, this is a terrible idea. And yes, that is correct, Anagram. If you have posted your novel in its entirety online, like on Wattpad or anywhere, it counts as already published. So, no, they aren't going to probably want to take it, because anybody who wants to read it can do so for free on whatever platform you've shared it on. So that is absolutely a thing. So that is one of the reasons why I advise against using Wattpad or any of those other websites, unless it is something that you are, uh, unless it is something that is just you're putting out there for fun and don't plan on publishing. Like, if you want to do fan fiction or something, go ahead. Put it up all over AO3, wherever you do your fan fiction, that's great. But if you're writing like a novel and this is something you want to publish, don't post it in public. Now, if you are sharing it in like a closed group, for example, this one, and you are sharing pieces of it in, say, the critique files section that we have, that does not count as publishing it, because that is not making it free for everyone to read. You are talking to a small, limited group, not marketing it. This is for critique. And at any time you can remove it if you would like to. That doesn't count as pre-publishing it by any publisher's standards that I've ever heard of. And I've been in the industry for 12 years now, I think, and a publisher for a large percentage of that time. However, you do want to make sure that you aren't just posting your entire novel up on whatever writing location you have. You can put up excerpts if you want to put up a chapter or two, or have a teaser that you share. That is a completely reasonable thing to do. So putting up teasers and individual chapters will not disqualify you from getting published. But if you put up the entire thing, well, I know this is frequently used in ways that I think are gross, but the saying, why buy the cow when you can get the milk for free, applies here. Because I'm not going to buy the cow, I'm not going to buy your book if I can read it online for free. What's the incentive to purchase it? And that is a thing. Even a first draft, I wouldn't do it. I that is not a smart idea. Sharing pieces of it, absolutely, but the whole thing, I would not put in public. Again, also, I wouldn't really want everybody to see my first draft ever. Anyway, there are exceptions to that. Like, I oftentimes will post first drafts in this group because I receive critique, and I don't mind the writers here knowing that even myself, as a longtime editor and an author and a publisher myself, my prose is not perfect the first time around, so I don't mind people seeing the bumps and warts here, or in a place where I feel like it's a learning opportunity, or a place that is safe for that. Right, Ellie, exactly. The all hat. That sounds like it's some sort of artifact from a fantasy novel that is written by, I don't know, Terry Pratchett, the all hat. There we go. That's a very Pratchett-esque. And that's okay, Rurik. I mean, when it comes to, you've written a lot of fan fiction. Fan fiction is okay to be a first draft because the fan fiction community, a lot of folks are doing that. That is a thing that is all right. But when you start entering into trying to publish professionally, you are never going to be publishing your first draft, and if you are, you have made a mistake. A terrible mistake.
If I can just jump in there, a best-selling series started as a fan fiction.
Yeah, my husband in the background, I don't know if you heard him, but he said there are several best-selling series that started as fan fiction.
Like 50 Shades.
Right, 50 Shades of Grey was a Twilight fanfic. Now, we're not going to talk about how much or how little I like 50 Shades of Grey, because we hates it precious. However, it is an example of something that started out as fan fiction and became something more than that and was publishable externally. So fan fiction is valid, and I will never tell people not to do it. That is a thing that I champion here a lot, is fanfic. I know there are plenty of authors and plenty of other folks who like to talk down about it, but I will never do that. Because it is a phenomenal place to practice and learn and get feedback from communities and discover what does and doesn't work. Um, what is RR anagram? That is not a uh, something I recognize. Royal Road, okay. They're sort of they're like a Wattpad some type of thing, yes? Alright, okay, cool. Good to know. So yeah, that would be a. I don't recommend posting the entire thing on Royal Road. However, if you wanted to write something just for Royal Road that you weren't going to publish traditionally or self-publish, then great, go for it. But you can use Wattpad and other such similar things to grow an audience of readers. Same thing with like AO3 and other fanfiction sites. You can use it to develop and cultivate people who love your writing. Just don't show them the thing that you're asking them to pay money for. So that is my suggestion. Um, Other things to expect from publishing. We actually had a brief talk about this earlier. Genres. Uh, Genres are a nothing but a marketing tool. They're literally nothing else. And with them being nothing but a marketing tool, it is not wise to fight the marketing tool. Um, there are a lot of people, and I'm not calling anybody out in this because I'm actually pulling this from other places, but there's a really common trend of folks wanting to write romance novels and then getting upset that they have to have a happily ever after or various other different tenets of the genre. And excuse me, cat. I know. And when people get upset about, well, I want to write romance, but I don't want to write romance as the genre, it doesn't work well. Because if you're going to, it's like I said earlier today, it's like using a screwdriver to try and turn a bolt. It's not going to work. Nobody's going to be happy about it. And anybody who picks up the screwdriver and tries to turn a bolt with it is going to be sadly disappointed. There are, like, people get so hung up about genre and don't seem to realize that it is not actually a reflection of your book, and it has nothing to do with a great deal of, honestly, it has nothing to do with your writing. It's just what category that they put it into so that people who are looking for similar works can find your writing. So it's just what shelf on the bookstore it goes on, which honestly doesn't really matter that much in terms of integrity of the work or you as an author. You just need to know what shelf your book goes on. And that's not exactly a big deal, but a lot of people like to get very spicy about that and or very offended when you say, actually, that's not your genre. And whenever anybody says that kind of thing, when I tell people you're not writing the genre you think you are, it's not because I'm telling them their writing isn't fantastic or that their story isn't good or that they need to change anything about their book. I'm just telling them that they should put it on a different shelf. Because the people who want to read their work, the people who are really going to want to engage with that story, aren't going to be looking on the shelf that they're putting it on. And that's just going to result in either them getting no book sales or them upsetting readers who bought their book expecting one thing and got another, and that will do you very badly in marketing, because if I go to the grocery store trying to buy a peach and all I find are mangoes that are labeled as peaches, I'm going to be pretty cheesed. I'm just putting that out there. If I order a peach off of Wish and get a mango, which is probably what'll happen if you order a peach off of Wish, then don't do that to people. It's just going to result in people getting angry and demanding refunds or throwing their fruit at you. So, that is, a piece of advice I have. Other things to expect when getting into publishing. To some extent, well, at this point, once you start getting into publishing, you are going to be a public figure. A right lead. And so if you are going to be getting into publishing and putting your name out there, whether it is a pen name or not, you are going to be a public figure, at least in that persona, which means you're going to need to act like a public figure and accept the attention that comes with being a public figure. What I mean by that is you're going to, and this kind of ties back into the marketing conversation, but isn't really about marketing itself. It's sort of like separating your author and personal social media accounts and making sure your public-facing social media accounts contain things that drive your brand rather than, say, a bunch of political rants, which, unless you're writing about politics, is probably not going to get you book sales. In fact, it's more likely to hurt you. So it's things like that. You're not wrong, lead. We're not going to talk about Watership Down. Just shh. And exactly, Rurik. And, sell them a fish and sell them what they're actually trying to buy. And that is where genre is. And you want to sell people what they're looking for, because if you aren't selling what people are looking for, you're not going to sell them any books. But the social media thing, or forward-facing things, like, for example, do not use your personal Facebook account as your author account. You should have a page dedicated to it so people don't have to try and friend request you, for example. You can have multiple different accounts on social media. You could recognize that people may track you down and find you. So if it's on Twitter, where everybody can see what you say forever, that's something to be aware of. But in Facebook, nobody can send me a friend request. Nobody can see what I post without me receiving a friend request from them. And I don't normally just accept friend requests from anybody. They have to have some kind of relation to me. That is I can only speak about American publishing, but the reality is, even in German, it might have your full name and address, but you should have an author page rather than just your personal Facebook account, for example. And recognize that your public-facing social media should be a place where you do nothing but drive your brand and build that sort of thing, rather than talking about anything sort of deeply personal, unless you are including that in your branding. That's true, Nid, absolutely, but those people who do use Twitter, Twitter doesn't have a great deal for privacy, so whatever you post on Twitter is visible on Twitter to pretty much everybody. So being aware of what you share, like, and comment on Twitter, if you are doing it as a public figure, is something you should really be considering. So that is definitely a thing. I have seen authors shoot themselves in the foot and tank their career by engaging in fights online and doing so on their author accounts, so all of their followers and all of their fans get to see their egregious behavior. Now, being an author and being a public figure means you have a platform, so if you have opinions and want to share them, it's a good way to do that, but you need to make sure that you're not destroying your brand. Right, Heather, exactly. Right, Lead, you can definitely use it to just share art. That is fantastic. And that is stuff that drives your brand. And it's a positive thing, so I'm 100% behind that. So that kind of thing is something you'll really want to think about and consider. Further, let's see, what other things can we... Publishing, if you are self-publishing, can and should be kind of expensive. Because editing is not cheap, nor should it be. If you hire a very cheap editor, there's a good chance you're going to get what you pay for. I have a horror story right now. I have a friend who worked with an editor in exchange for that friend reviewing that editor's books on Amazon. I am deeply unimpressed, because that will both get this person banned from Amazon entirely if Amazon ever finds out that those reviews were done in exchange for compensation for a favorable review, and the editing they received in return, I'll put it to you this way. This supposedly skilled, supposedly experienced developmental editor had no idea where to split a 300,000-word book into multiple books. I have split 80,000-word books into 3 before, and helped authors create a series out of a single book. This supposed editor couldn't figure out how to split a 300,000-word book into something publishable. I expect that the tone of my voice, and those of you watching on video can see by the expression on my face exactly what I think about that. I don't have these editors' names, and they don't have a public page. Otherwise, I would nuke them from orbit and tell you who they are. I don't know who they are. And I can't warn you against them. But I can say that if an editor is willing to edit for anything except money, or if they're brand new, if they're willing to like, hey, I'm new, I don't have a lot of experience, so I'm willing to do this for portfolio building. If they're being honest, then they may not be the best editor on the planet, but at least you're getting an honest person. And yes, Anagram, there will be a YouTube video on which you can see my lovely face, while I speak. Heather, excellent advice. Recognizing house rules for publishers. Publishers all have style guides and things that they require. There are, for example, Insomnia Publishing, we are really, really sticky about the Oxford comma. We use it. You get no say. So things like that. And yeah, definitely there are... Oh, you don't get to use Oxford commas? Oh, Heather. Oh, my soul hurts for you. Ouch. They'll recognize that editors will fix things, but... Right, exactly, Anagram. But yes, publishers all have personal style guides that they will follow. Yes, they will probably use Chicago's Manual of Style for a lot of things, but grammar and punctuation are actually not universal in some respects. There are elements that some people use, some people don't. For example, M-dashes, which if you don't know what an M-dash is, well, we can talk about that another day. In some publishers, you have a space around M-dashes, in others you do not. For some publishers, you will have a space after an ellipsis, others you do not. So it really depends on that author's preferences. Now, I know what my preferences are, and I can wax philosophical on my editorial preferences from here until next week, but I'm not going to at the moment, because that's not what we're here to discuss. So let's see, what else do we have here? Other things to expect from publishing. Recognize that your friends and family may not attend your book launch or buy your book. And don't take it personally. I have, at my book launch, since I had it on Twitch, I had a number of people who visited. I had a number of people who had other obligations that night and couldn't attend the live stream even if they wanted to. I have another number of people who really would love to support me but can't afford to buy a book right now. I have friends of mine who support me wholeheartedly but really are not interested in the genre I'm writing in. And so on and so forth. So that is something to recognize, that just because your friends and family don't all get excessively hyped up and may not attend all of your events or buy your book in every format, that doesn't mean they don't support you. Don't take it personally. Because there are a million reasons why a friend or family member might not buy your book. I have a friend who said he makes it his policy not to engage too much with things like that, because if my book was awful or he hated it, he would not want to tell me that, and he feels that he couldn't just not tell me that if he felt that about my book. And he doesn't want to hurt me or cause me any kind of issues, so it's better if he doesn't engage. And you know what? I don't take that as a bad thing, and I respect that decision. And he's a really good friend because he wants to support me and encourage me, but at the same time, he doesn't want to do anything that he would perceive as potentially being harmful. So he doesn't want to buy my book or read it. Not because he doesn't care, but because it would potentially be a problem for him. And he doesn't want to hurt me. So that kind of thing can happen. And it doesn't reflect badly on you. You also may have friends and family who just do not like your book. Again, it may not reflect badly on you, because if I'm trying to, I write urban fantasy, if my friend only reads true crime and isn't into my novel, it's not like I'm going to be offended by that, because they just don't like that genre. Ah, there you are, Heather. Let's see. Yep. As I said, yeah, your first book probably not going to do great unless you have a series following, and then the first book might start climbing. Your first novel's not likely going to sell a ton. It's going to take time to build up the momentum and get people to recognize you. Also, for many writers, your first novel is not going to be your best. For example, I can answer that. Give me just a second, Rurik. For example, the first book in the Dresden Files, the first 3 books in the Dresden Files series, which I absolutely love. The Dresden Files series is an excellent series if you like urban fantasy, but the first 3 books, they're kind of rough. They're a little janky. He finds his stride at like book 4. You shouldn't skip the first 3, but he doesn't really find his stride until the 4th book. And even then, he continues to improve over the length of the series. Your first novel is not probably going to be the best novel you write, and it may not sell extremely well, but it is your starting place. So don't agonize over that. Rurik, how long does it take from getting your book written to being published? That depends on a lot of factors. Once you have your book written and you hit the end, Heather, that is definitely possibly the case. It depends, but I'm going to start with, it depends on whether you're self-publishing or traditionally publishing. We'll start there. And whether or not you already have a publisher who is working with you. If you are self-publishing, that is going to largely depend on how quickly you move through the various different phases of pre-publishing work. So there are likely to be multiple drafts. I am currently on draft 2 of the second book of my series. I'm halfway through the first draft of my 3rd book in the series. And the first book took me a little over a year to write and redraft several times and run past beta readers. So that is something to be aware of. It may take you some time. The thing I suggest is, after you finish writing your novel, once you finish the first draft, take a break for a day or 2, maybe a week, celebrate the fact that you finished. The timeline is going to depend on you and how you feel about it. For me, I take a break for usually like 6 hours, and I'm like, well, time to start editing. And, dive into it, because I get really excited about editing my novels. Once I've finished the first draft, I get super excited. There are a lot of other people who are like, I never want to see you again. Go die in a hole, book. I'm done with you. And for them, editing may feel like pulling teeth. Right. Heather, you are exactly who I was thinking of. But so the timeline may differ, but you're going to want to go through at least 2 or 3 rounds of personal editing before you send it to a beta reader, or 2, or 3, or 5, or 10. Send it to as many beta readers as you can get. Also, something to expect, many beta readers will not finish the beta read, or might forget to do the beta read at all, or might take a very long time. Unless you are paying them, that is not personal. It doesn't mean your book is awful. It just means they're humans who are busy and may not have time or availability to think that hard about a book right now. So don't take that too personally. But that's why I always say more is better, because if you send it out to 10 and you get 3 or 4 solid people to beta read your book and get some data back, then you have done well. So be aware that that is absolutely a thing. Then once you've done with the beta reading, now I'm going to assume this is going to be a self-publishing track. If you're traditionally publishing, that is slightly different, and I will tell you more about that. But for self-publishing, once you've done the beta reading and fixed the drafts and done the beta reading and fixed the drafts, however many rounds that takes you, then you want to look for an editor to look over your book, to clean it up. Where do you find good beta readers? Well, this group is a start. There are some wonderful people in here who might beta read for you. Social media, other authors' channels and discords, anywhere where authors hang out, or if you have friends who are into this kind of thing, ask them. Yeah, local writers groups if you have any around you. I know, Lead, you live in an area where finding folks who are going to be interested in a novel in English may be a challenge, so you may want to look online. Nice, Rurik, that's great. Yes, sacrifices to the old gods may work. But finding places where writers hang out, you'll probably find some folks willing to beta read for you. I know there are groups on Facebook. If you're not on Facebook, you may or may not find some folks on Twitter. I know that there are other writing discords. I'm in multiple, including this one. There are folks here who can beta read for you. There are a whole bunch of people. You just have to kind of think about, okay, well, where do I find people who are interested in this and might know something about writing? With beta reading, make sure you take all advice that doesn't come from a pro with a grain of salt. A lot of it will be personal. Some of it may be personal opinion. Ellie, the difference between a test reader, beta reader, and developmental editor. Sort of. So a test reader might be somebody like, does this scene make sense to you? And ask somebody to read something for you just quickly. A beta reader is somebody who's reading a fully finished draft, usually the second draft or more. Oh, my entire computer's frozen. This is excellent. There we go. Sorry, my entire computer froze for a second. A beta reader usually reads the second draft or higher of a novel, and a developmental editor is a professional. Beta readers are typically not professionals unless you've hired one to beta read for you. A developmental editor looks at characters, plot, structure, pacing, organization. They will ask you questions about your world and setting. I have that friend I mentioned who got treated so badly by those supposed developmental editors. I don't think they asked him the right questions about his world building, because when I asked him certain questions about his world building, he didn't have answers for them, and they were really important questions. So things like that, usually a developmental editor is there to ask the questions, or in my case for developmental editing, if I'm working with somebody who's doing a novel set in a historical time period, those of you who don't know, I have my degree in European history. I will research things and I will look up and fact check stuff if I'm doing a developmental read, like broadly. For example, I had somebody write a novel set in ancient Rome, and they had somebody doing a cross-stitch. Cross-stitch didn't exist in that time period, at least not as in what we call cross-stitch now. There were X-shaped stitches for embroidery, but it was never going to be cross-stitch. That actually was an 1800s invention. So I caught that on him, and I changed it to just somebody was embroidering, and we moved on. Because historical fiction readers will catch things like that and it will make them angry. Yeah, sometimes beta readers think they're roommates. Yep, they're roommates. Good friends. Beta readers are typically not professionals, and while they can give you feedback on what they do and do not like, they are, by nature, not going to be sharing the kind of pointed feedback that a developmental editor does. So that is something to please keep in mind. But it does take a few rounds of beta reading and back and forth before your book is ready to be seen by an editor. Then you hire an editor. You can talk to the editor about what kind of editing you want. Now, there are generally speaking 3 types. There's developmental, line, and copy editing. To put those into a very brief nutshell, developmental editing, as I said, is plot, characters, story, pacing. Line editing is how you word things, word choice. It talks, it's, did you use too many adverbs? Is your writing passive? It talks about the construction of the writing itself. And finally, copy editing is focused mostly on grammar, punctuation, and syntax. So did you use the right there in this location? Things like that. That is mostly what copy editing is. Lead, yes and no. I mean, there's a lot of suspension of editors. Wow, my brain just went. suspension of disbelief that can happen in fantasy. So I am a big fan of historical accuracy for some things, but in fantasy, some things get a pass. So once you find you can also, at some point during this, there's also folks who do what is called book coaching. I have done that before, where you are still writing the first draft and just want to talk it through with somebody or ask specific questions or get specific feedback from somebody who can give you good advice on how to move forward, or someone who can and will give you data about what you should or should not be doing at this stage. Things like that. That is something that I regularly do for folks. I've had multiple coaching clients and they appreciate it. Now, you can have a single coaching session, or your coaching can last through the duration of you writing the story. The latter one can get quite expensive, because we're looking at between $40 and $60 an hour. And most of the time coaching, you meet for an hour at a time, or it could be a half an hour, depending on the minimum rates of the coach, and you talk things through. Once you have finished the editing rounds of things, at that point in time, if you are self-publishing, it is time to start looking for typesetting and cover design folks. At that point, you start speaking to cover designers and either hire a typesetter or do it yourself. If you are typesetting an ebook, it is easier to do it yourself. If you are typesetting for print, I wouldn't do that without some guidance, and for the love of God, do not use Word or any word processor to typeset your book for print, because you will have regrets, and it will not look good. Don't do it. Save yourself. If you are looking to get into typesetting and want to typeset your own book, I strongly suggest that you use Affinity Publisher. It is a piece of software that is similar to InDesign, which is the industry standard for typesetting. Affinity Publisher is the equivalent of that, except it is $50 once and you own it forever, versus Adobe's egregious fees. There are softwares out there that do typesetting for print books. I believe Scrivener exports print-ready PDFs, theoretically, but you are going to get a far superior product from a human being who knows what to do. World Anvil is excellent, but I wouldn't typeset on World Anvil. I love World Anvil for world building and all kinds of other things, but it is not something that I would trust to typeset my novel for me, particularly for print. If you are typesetting for ebook, you can do that very quickly in a number of programs. There's a free program called Calibre, which is the one I use. I format the book for ebook in Word and send it over to Calibre, turn it into an EPUB, and then I'm done. But you can also export an ebook from Scrivener and a number of other pieces of writing software. But once you've got your formatting done, then you are going to need to do things like buy an ISBN, which is International Standard Book Number. You are going to want one of those. Lead, yes, you have to typeset for an ebook, but it is much less miserable than for a print book, and it is more formatting than typesetting. It is a much less painful process. Basically, you need to have all your chapter headers as headings. You need to link them all into a... you need to link them... You can use it as a docs file. You just have to format the docs file correctly. And once but you cannot upload that docs file well, you could upload it to Amazon, but you'll have regrets. Calibre is free and open source. You can get it. I strongly suggest taking that docs file, formatting it in your word processor, which LibreOffice, OpenOffice, any of those will work and do the same thing, and then use Calibre to turn it into an ebook format, which includes the cover and such. I would not trust Amazon to do it for you. Amazon tends to bungle things. However, it doesn't need to cost you anything else. So I can do a workshop on how to typeset for ebook easily here and teach you that. That's not something that you have to spend extra money on. You just need to know how to format it properly. It's not difficult and doesn't require any code, which is good because I can't do code. God help me, I can barely make something italics in HTML without screwing it up. So, not my thing. So you don't need to know code to do it. There are people who like to do CSS custom for things, but you don't need that in order to make a very functional ebook. Then once you have the ISBN, you have to make sure you also put in all the copyright information in the front matter. Then you get your file and you can upload it to Amazon, or I advise using a combination of Amazon and Draft2Digital, which is an ebook distributor which doesn't charge you. It's not like Ingram where you have to pay money to distribute your ebook. Draft2Digital also gives better royalty payments. So just as a shout out there, a friend of mine taught me that. If you are traditionally publishing, we're going to go back to the point where you start beta reading and looking for editors. At that point, you may or may not want to hire an editor to edit your book, because if a traditional publisher picks you up, they are going to be doing the editing to their house standards, styles, and preferences. And however, if you do a bunch of querying and nobody's biting and people are saying your book needs work, then maybe hire a professional to give it a scrub before you send it off. Again, or maybe you're not doing your formatting of your query letters right or what have you. But that is definitely a thing. So that is, but once you've gotten all of your beta reading, that's when you start researching publishers and or agents and start sending them query letters. Overall, this timeline between finishing and printing can be anywhere between 6-8 months to a couple of years. Personally, I know that Heather's publishing company does rapid release more or less, but I generally speaking need about 6 months to edit a book, and once the book is in final form, you need about 3 months, and then you do the release. So 9 overall. During the 3-month period where the book is finished, that is when you're starting to solicit reviews and other such things, which is where you're going to get pre-release reviews from like Publisher Weekly. They require it to be 90 days before the release date if they are going to review the book. And there are a lot of reviewers who, if you're going to do pre-release reviews, it's going to be 90 days before release date minimum, because they want to have time to actually read the book and not be in a hurry. Rurik, yes and no, because some of this will have to do with money and other people's time. So I have clients who come to me who want editing done now, but if I'm booking out a ways, then they can either find another editor or they get to wait a little bit until I'm available if they want to work with me, because I only have so much time. If you are hiring a cover designer, it depends on how long it takes the cover designer to make your cover. Some of it might be financial, because editing is not cheap. I charge anywhere between $1,500 to $2,500 to edit a book, depending on the length of it. And that's not cheap, so for some folks, it takes them a while to put the money together. So there are a lot of factors between the beginning and end. And yeah, I know that sounds very expensive, but you are paying for 12 years of education, study, experience, knowledge, and you are paying for my electricity, my food, my internet bill, so I'm doing vastly more than just reading your book and making some comments in the margins. A good editor is worth their weight in gold. And I know this will sound self-important, but I consider myself to be a good editor, and I strongly advise... yes, Ellie, you are in some ways paying for not having to edit it yourself, but at the same time, you can't edit your own books effectively. I can't edit my own novels. There's a reason I have an editor. I cannot. Nobody can edit their own book effectively, because you're going to read what you meant to say rather than what you actually said, and you don't have the arm's length experience that somebody else new reading your book has, and you can't necessarily see the plot holes you've created that somebody else might be like, so I see. This person walks off stage left and never comes back. Ever. And it's not mentioned. Maybe do this. So that is definitely a thing. So yes, editing can be very expensive. There are various different rates. There are editors of more or less experience. Usually less experienced editors cost less. But if you're going to be hiring a professional, recognize that you are going to be making an investment. If you are self-publishing, do not skimp on this investment, because you are investing in your book. And if your editing is poor, people will not buy it. Or if they do buy it, they won't finish it. And they will leave reviews saying, wow, this was bad. And it will wreck you. So you are investing in what is essentially going to be your business. Because if you are going to be trying to be an author professionally, this is your business. You are, I hesitate to use the term, but you're sort of like an entrepreneur. So you have to invest in your business to make money. We are closing down toward the end here. Does anybody else have any questions that I have not answered or that I have missed regarding things to know when you first start getting ready to publish your book and what you should expect from it? Lead, I think that you might be able to do that, honestly, because being multilingual, you probably could do it effectively. I would just make sure you hire an editor for both versions. Like, you want to make sure that if you do translate it into your native language, that an editor who speaks your native language takes a look at it to make sure that all of the, P's and Q's, metaphorically speaking, I guess, are facing the correct directions and things like, one of the big things that I do as a copy editor is I make sure that the quotation marks are facing the right way. I recently worked on a manuscript for a friend of mine who had a mixture of smart quotes and stupid quotes, and I say stupid quotes because they are just one direction. They don't actually bracket the, there we go, it's in frame. They don't actually bracket the text, they're just two straight sets of quotes on either side. And half of the things were in smart quotes, half of the things were in dumb quotes, so I had to go through and fix them all to be homogeneous. They can be either, it doesn't matter which, but they should all be the same. So things like that are part of why we make the big bucks. I see a bunch of typing happening. Yeah, more or less lead. Some different style guides have that middle one that is not in English. It is always going to be the first or the last, unless you're British English, in which case they use a single quotation mark to delineate dialogue. It will be just one, not double. So that is a thing also that you pay for when you hire an editor, is us knowing whether or not, what style guide you're using and being able to conform to it. So that is part of why we are expensive, because we are constantly learning, keeping up on, and watching all of these different trends and things as they evolve and as language changes and as the style guides evolve. So that's part of why we're expensive, is we do that kind of stuff so you don't have to. Ugh. That's so frustrating, Tara. Ugh. That's one of the reasons why Google Docs is not my editing software of choice. I refuse to use it. I use Word. Yes, Word can mass convert quotes. It does take some finagling. It makes you do some tap dancing to know how to do it. But yeah, so definitely some, I work in Word. I know Scrivener is excellent, as I've been told. I really don't want to pay for it because I find it overwhelming and complicated, and I don't want to spend 2 weeks learning how to use writing software when I can just open YWriter and just go. I use Word for editing, but I write in YWriter, which is an open source, free program designed for writers. It has a lot of the same functions as Scrivener. Also, there's QuallWriter, Quoll writer. I'll type these in the chat. Both of those are excellent if you are on a budget and don't want to use or find Scrivener imposing. And that's fine, Tara. I respect that. There is software available for anybody. I know people who write in, like, Notepad, so whatever system or software works for you is fantastic, and I'm so glad there are things that work for you. It just does not work for me. LibreOffice is fine. There's nothing wrong with using LibreOffice. Or OpenOffice, if that's your preferred. Both of those are perfectly reasonable. Pen and paper is great. I can't write pen and paper, though, because I have problems with my hands. So physically, I can't write a novel in pen and paper. Um, yeah, that makes sense, Tara. When I downloaded the trial, I found Scrivener impossible to navigate because they also like to hide everything to keep the interface clean. So I couldn't find anything and was about ready to scream and uninstalled it. It was like, okay, I'm done. It's not gonna get me now. It can't. It's not on my hard drive anymore. I'm safe. So that was, a thing. I don't know. It was a while ago. This was some time ago when I tried it and then ran away screaming and flailing. So it may have changed by now, but when I tried it, I was like, oh no, oh no. So I just switched over to YWriter, which I also really like, by the way. YWriter, even if you write in LibreOffice, you might want to consider, I don't know if LibreOffice does it, but finding a software that will read your book back to you is very helpful when self-editing. It is so helpful. If you have software that will read your book back to you, it will save you a lot of misery. YWriter, in fact, does that. The computer voice is horrible, but it does it. Word also does that. So both of those programs use that. That would be really cool, Lead. Rurik, Word also does voice to text. You can do that in Word for Windows, if you would like to. However, recognize that, of course, speech to text does have limitations, and it will require a lot of editing, but if you find that easier or have issues with typing, it is a thing that is available to you. Um, yeah, Lead, that's one of the reasons why when I did my giveaways, the physical items, like one of them's a piece of paper, I could have shipped that anywhere. Fortunately, the two people who won the physical items lived in town with me, so I can just drive to their house and be like, here, take it! It's yours now! One of them's actually coming over tonight. Excuse me. So that is, I think that is pretty much everything. We are at about time, so I'm going to, when is Smoke and Magic 2 out? Well, right now it is in beta reading, and I am fighting with a particular plot hole. That's when so it's going to be out, I'm hoping by the end of this year. But if not the end of this year, the beginning of next year is my goal. So we're looking, fourth quarter of 2022, first quarter of 2023. Book 3 is half written. Ellie, if you would like to read the draft I'm on and help me figure out the problems, I would be happy to send it to you so you can explore that, since you have been very helpful. Same thing with anybody here. If I'm dealing with a plot snarl, so if anybody would like to read the second book in my series in the current state it's in and help me untangle a plot snarl, I would be happy to let you do it. And I will probably be uploading some of the first files of book 3 soon for critique, but I'm not done with the first draft, so. When I wrote the first book, I was uploading the new chapters as I wrote them, just as an accountability thing. Yeah, a plot snarl. Yeah, maybe we can talk Mel into drawing one. Sure, if you would like to do that. You don't need to have read the first book for the second one to make sense, but it may make more sense. I can send you book 1 if you would like. If you're going to help me with book 2, I can send you an ebook of book 1 for free. I don't mind at all, because it doesn't cost me anything to send ebooks to people. But I can send you the second book if you would like to read it, and I can explain what the hole is that I'm trying to fill. Anyway, so have a good night, everybody. It was lovely to see you. Welcome to the new folks who came. And I would love to have, of course, suggestions for next week's workshop. I'm always looking for things that folks would like me to go over. If folks would like me to do a workshop on typesetting, I can do that. Yes, book 2 is also the same book 3. It is actually following a human spy in that setting. So, different main character, but book 2 follows the same character as book 1. Thank you so much. Have a great evening, and I'm going to go attack my players with dragons because it's D&D night. So D&D in Chinese, here I come. Have a great night, everybody.